Welcome to Project Porsche.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Project Porsche. So if you have a 924 or 944, there is a good chance that your windows don't work that well. There seems to be like a mismatch between the curvature of the window glass and the curvature of that channel that the glass slides up and down in. I'm not sure if it's the entire reason why these windows jam and get slow, but it's definitely a big part of it. The metal tracks that these windows slide up and down in either becomes warped or just didn't have the right bend from the factory. So on today's episode, I show you how I put my doors back together and how I did some bending of the metal guides that the window travel in to make the window work better.
So stay tuned. Stay tuned!
I needed to put the regulator and the glass in the doors so I could see if these aftermarket guides were going to work. But before I did that, I pulled my face mask out and some brake parts cleaner, and I cleaned all the dirt and dried grease off of these regulators, and I cleaned up the glass as well so that everything was clean and ready for new grease. I used a wire brush and a nylon brush, and I tried to clean all the dirt and old grease out of all the crevices where it collected. And I tapped on the leads of the motor with a couple of jumper wires off of my battery to move the regulator so I could get at all the old grease. And once they were clean, I went about greasing the regulators with fresh grease. I searched the web for what kind of grease I should use on these things, but there wasn't any definitive answers, so I ended up using a couple of different greases. First, I sprayed some lithium WD-40 into the places where I didn't think I'd be able to reach with any of the thicker grease. Then I put white lithium grease on the outside of those rollers and inside the tracks, and then I used what looks like a wheel bearing grease, but is still a lithium grease on most of the parts of the regulator. And I also used some red synthetic grease, which I've heard some bad things about, so I don't know if I would recommend that one. Basically, the lithium grease is what I used. So I'm not sure if the glass was chipped from dropping it inside the door, or if it's chipped because that is where that binding point was in that metal channel. I could see how that corner of the glass could be chipped by that, but either way, I couldn't just leave that chip in there because it was kind of sharp and jagged, and it would have chewed up my new guides. So I whipped out some heavy grit sandpaper and I sanded down that jagged edge, and then I switched to a higher number wet dry sandpaper, and I did just enough to make sure it was smooth and wouldn't catch on the felt guides. After that, I took advantage of having the glass out, and I took a razor blade, go over this window and scrape off any bumps that I could feel, and scrape the specks of overspray paint and whatever else I had on there that had collected on the glass over time. This would be the perfect time for me to tint my windows, but I didn't have enough of that under my bench, so I just went about cleaning them with the razor blades, making sure they were as clean as I could get them, and then I got them ready for the door by greasing the regulator track with white lithium grease. I can't tell you how many times I had to take these windows in and out, but I did eventually get better at it. The process that worked for me was to start by putting a rag or a towel in the bottom of the door to protect the glass if it was to fall. So I put a towel or a shirt or a rag or something in the bottom of the door first. And then I put the glass in the door and pushed it all the way up and put some tape on the top to hold it. Then I put the regulators loosely in the doors, plug it in, and let it rest on the bottom of the floor of the door. Put the key in the ignition. Then I use the power window switch and I adjust the regulator to move those rollers to the ideal place. Then fed them into the slots on the glass. Then I use the button to make the regulator in the right spot. Then I finally bolt the regulator to the door. Once the regulator is bolted to the door, then you can get out that little channel that bolts to the inside of the door skin here. So I just need to reattach this part over here now. Feed it onto the roller and then loosely bolt it to the inside of the door. It's really important to make sure you have this little channel right side up. You don't want to install it upside down. And then once you have it bolted to the door loosely, you use that to make the adjustments in the window glass and change the angle of the glass to operate smoothly inside the window channel. That was my way of putting these doors back together. After all the parts were cleaned and lubed, I put the new guides, glass, and regulator back in the door. Once everything was hooked up, I could test the window to see if it was working correctly, and that's when it became clear that the glass was not gliding in the felt guides like it should. It's hard to see, but if you look closely, you can just make out the rubber guide there that is twisted and pushed out by the glass once the glass reaches that point in its travel. Okay, that doesn't look very good. That ain't working right. Doggone it. There's a point in about halfway down its travel where the window glass starts to bind against the actual channels that it runs in. When the window gets to approximately somewhere in here, it pushes so hard on the edge that it actually twists it and pushes it out the other way. I assume that that's why the other ones wore the way they wore. And I'm also assuming that that choke point, this sort of bindage point here, is probably the problem of why they break. The thing I welded down there. Here's a shot of the driver's side window as it goes up and down, and you can see how it starts chattering when it reaches that same point on the driver's side. And it starts shuddering when it gets to that point. Yeah. After thinking about it for a little while, I decided the best way for me to try to address this binding point was to get in there with pliers and try to bend that channel a little bit so that the glass didn't bind on that spot. So I marked it out where it seemed like it was binding the most. Then I pulled the rubber guides back out and I got in there with a channel lock pliers and I bent that inside edge of the metal channel out a little bit. Well, I definitely bent it. Maybe we'll just try that and see how it goes. Are you feeling yourself? Yeah, I'm feeling myself. Are you feeling yourself? Yeah, I'm feeling myself. I wanted to avoid scraping up that channel as much as possible, so I used a set of channel locks that was kind of smooth inside its jaws. It didn't have sharp teeth, but it's inside the door, so it should be fine. It's not the prettiest job I've ever seen. It is a little rippled, but it's good enough. It's inside the door, and the point is that the window glass is not grabbing that seal and pushing it out like it was before. Now the glass is working like it should. I had to do the same thing on the driver's side, so I pulled out the speaker and repeated the process on the driver's door. I needed to bend the metal enough to make the glass travel better, but not overdo it and create too much slop in that channel. So I took my time, checked my work as I went, and eventually got the glass to travel like it should. I'm gonna leave it right there. So it's hard to see, but I did take a little bend out of that channel. It's not the prettiest, but it looks pretty good, so I'm just gonna leave it. Put this thing back together. So there it is. 924S windows that work like they should. Be sure to check back for episode 9 part 4. And thank you to all my subscribers. Thank you for subscribing. Thanks for watching, guys.
This is pretty much the worst video ever made.
Yeah.